In a small Oregon town, where shadows held secrets and silence spoke volumes, a group of arrogant bikers made the deadliest mistake of their lives. They chose to mock a quiet man in a wheelchair, unaware that beneath his unassuming exterior lay the lethal training of an elite special forces operator. Their laughter would soon turn to terror as they discovered that some wounds make warriors more dangerous, not less. This is the story of how a forgotten hero reminded the world that true strength isn't measured by what you can see, but by what you don't see coming. If you want to witness how one man's quest for peace turned into a battle for justice, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story will change how you look at the quiet ones forever. Cedar Grove had a heartbeat of its own, a slow, steady rhythm that pulsed through its rain-slicked streets and towering pines. Unlike the chaos of bigger cities, this small Oregon town wore its darkness differently, not in neon and sirens, but in whispers and sideways glances. In the rougher Oakwood District, where moss-covered buildings stood like tired sentinels and forgotten dreams hung heavy in the misty air, Landry Lance Winters lived in a modest craftsman house, its weathered blue paint and well-maintained yard standing out like a badge of defiance against the surrounding decay. The locals knew little about the man in the wheelchair, only that he appeared 3 years ago, as silent as the fog that rolled down from the mountains. His military straight posture and vigilant eyes suggested a story, but in Cedar Grove some questions were better left unasked. Most assumed he was just another broken veteran, seeking solitude in the town's perpetual gray. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that before the wheelchair, before the scars that mapped his body like angry constellations, Landry Ghost Wolf Winters had been one of the most lethal operators in Special Forces history. His missions were the kind that governments denied, and history books would never record. Now he spent his days in calculated routine, managing the constant pain in his reconstructed spine with the same precision he once used to orchestrate classified operations. The morning everything changed started like any other. Landry wheeled himself onto his covered front porch, a steaming cup of black coffee balanced on his chair's custom-built holder. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and approaching rain, but something else rode beneath it, tension like the charge before a storm. He noticed it in the way Mrs. Chen hurried past with her son Noah, the 7-year-old's usual cheerful wave replaced by a quick, nervous glance. "Morning, Mr. Winters," Grace Chen called out, her voice tight with unspoken worry as she guided Noah quickly along the cracked sidewalk. Landry nodded, his sharp eyes catching the fresh graffiti on the wall across the street. A snarling wolf's head in blood-red spray paint. The Iron Wolves were marking new territory, pushing deeper into Oakwood. He'd heard whispers about the motorcycle gang, how they'd started in Portland and were spreading like a virus through smaller towns, bringing their own brand of chaos with them. The distant rumble of motorcycles drew his attention. Not the usual morning traffic. This was different, a predatory sound that made the coffee cup in his hand tremble slightly. Years of training had taught him to read situations like others read books, and every instinct told him this was just the beginning. Detective Mason Rhodes's unmarked car rolled past, slowing briefly. The detective's weathered face appeared in the window, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Might want to stay inside today, Winters. Weather's turning bad." But Landry knew it wasn't the weather Mason was worried about. The Iron Wolves had been pushing out other gangs across the state, leaving a trail of broken communities and shattered lives. Cedar Grove was just their latest target, and Oakwood, with its forgotten streets and struggling residents, was ripe for the taking. Inside his house, Landry wheeled past the seemingly ordinary furniture to the locked room that had once been a study. His fingers moved automatically, entering the complex sequence into a hidden keypad. The door clicked open, revealing walls lined with monitors showing feeds from discrete cameras placed throughout the neighborhood. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. On one screen, he watched Noah Chen make his way to Cedar Grove Elementary, where Elena Reyes, the boy's teacher, waited at the entrance. Noah reminded him of another child, from another life, a memory that still burned like phosphorus in the dark corners of his mind. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on another monitor showing 3 motorcycles circling the block, their riders marked with the distinctive red wolf patches of the gang. They were testing boundaries, learning patterns, preparing for something bigger. Landry recognized the tactics because he'd once used them himself in operations across the globe. The difference was, these weren't trained soldiers with a mission. They were predators looking for prey. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. James Sullivan at the VA. Monthly checkup tomorrow. Don't skip this one. Landry allowed himself a grim smile. Sullivan was one of the few who knew his full history, who understood that the wheelchair wasn't a sign of weakness, but a reminder of the price paid for walking in shadows. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, then cut off abruptly. They were close now, probably at the end of his street. Landry's hands moved to the wheels of his chair, feeling the subtle modifications he'd made. Reinforced frame, hidden compartments, custom brakes. To most, it looked like a standard wheelchair. But like its owner, appearances were deceiving. Through the window, he watched three figures dismount their bikes. Their leader, a tall man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, pointed toward Landry's house. The morning sun glinted off the brass knuckles adorning his fingers. Axel Reaper Kane, if the intel was correct. Behind him, Dominic Snake Torres adjusted his leather vest, a bulge under his arm suggesting he wasn't just carrying a wallet. They were about to make their first move, unaware they were dealing with a man who had spent his life anticipating first moves. As Landry watched them approach his porch, he felt a familiar calm settle over him. The same stillness that had preceded every operation, every mission, every moment when life and death hung in the balance. The Iron Wolves were about to learn a harsh lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one they mistake for prey. The heavy boots of the Iron Wolves thundered up Landry's porch steps, each footfall echoing like distant artillery in his combat-trained ears. Through the security feed displayed on his smartwatch, he counted 3 more bikers lingering by their motorcycles, hands hovering near concealed weapons. Standard flanking formation, amateur execution. These weren't soldiers. They were bullies playing at war. Axel Reaper Kane's knuckles crashed against the door, the brass rings leaving dents in the aged wood. "Open up, old-timer. Neighborhood welcome committee's here to chat." His voice carried the artificial confidence of someone used to intimidating weaker opponents. Landry wheeled himself to the door with deliberate slowness, his movements precise and measured. Years of operations had taught him that timing was everything. He opened the door, positioning his chair at a calculated angle, appearing vulnerable while maintaining optimal maneuverability. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" His voice was quiet, roughened by years of barking orders in sandstorms and mountain passes. Kane's eyes narrowed, taking in the wheelchair, the military posture, the seemingly harmless appearance of the man before him. Behind him, Snake Torres smirked, spinning a heavy chain around his fist. The third biker, a younger man with fresh gang tattoos still healing on his neck, shifted nervously. "Nice place you got here," Kane said, running his brass-covered fingers along the doorframe. "Real peaceful. Thing is, peace comes with a price these days. Protection ain't free, especially for folks who might need extra help." His eyes flickered meaningfully to Landry's wheelchair. The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. In his earpiece, hidden by his longer-than-regulation hair, Landry heard the tactical feed from his security system. The 3 bikers by the motorcycles were getting restless, spreading out to cover more ground. Amateur mistakes. "I appreciate the offer," Landry replied, his tone level. "But I take care of my own protection." Kane's fake smile vanished. He stepped forward, looming over the wheelchair. "Maybe you're not hearing me right, cripple. This ain't an offer. This is how things are gonna be now. The Iron Wolves own Oakwood. You either pay up or—" A child's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Winters, look what I made." Noah Chen came running up the sidewalk, clutching a paper in his hands, his mother Grace calling after him in alarm. The boy froze as he noticed the bikers, his excitement turning to fear as Kane turned to face him with a predatory grin. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion to the trained observers who would later review the security footage. As Kane took a step toward Noah, Landry's wheelchair moved with liquid precision, The former Special Forces operator spun the chair in a tight arc, its reinforced frame slamming into Kane's knee with surgical accuracy. The gang leader stumbled, his brass knuckles missing Noah by inches as Grace snatched her son back. Snake Torres reached for his concealed weapon, but Landry was already moving. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His wheelchair's right armrest detached in his grip, revealing a hardened tactical baton. The weapon struck Torres's wrist with a sharp crack before he could draw. The gun clattered uselessly to the porch. "Noah, take your mother inside. Now." Landry's command voice cut through the chaos, carrying the weight of countless battlefield orders. The Chens hurried past the stunned bikers into the safety of his house. Kane struggled to his feet, rage replacing his earlier arrogance. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man." He spat blood from where he'd bitten his tongue. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Landry's response carried the cold certainty of someone who had danced with death in places that didn't exist on maps. "Actually, I do. 3 more of your men by the bikes, 2 carrying modified Glocks, 1 with what looks like a sawed-off shotgun poorly hidden under his vest. You're not soldiers. You're not even good criminals. You're just bullies who picked the wrong quiet town and the wrong broken man to threaten." The younger biker took an involuntary step back, recognizing something in Landry's voice that his leaders were too arrogant to hear, the tone of someone who had dealt death in the dark places of the world. Kane's face contorted with fury. "Nobody talks to the Iron Wolves like that. Nobody. This ain't over, wheelchair warrior. We're gonna—" "Detective Rhodes." Landry cut him off, his eyes fixed on something beyond the gang members. Perfect timing. The bikers turned to see Mason Rhodes's unmarked car pulling up, its blue lights now flashing. The detective stepped out, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Everything okay here, Winters?" "Just a social call," Landry replied calmly. "These gentlemen were leaving." Kane's jaw clenched as he weighed his options. Finally, he jerked his head toward his men. "This ain't finished, not by a long shot." The threat in his voice was pure poison. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared away, Detective Rhodes approached the porch, eyeing the dropped gun and the dents in the doorframe. "Want to tell me what really happened?" Landry was already turning his chair to head inside where the Chens waited. "Nothing I couldn't handle, Mason. But you might want to put a patrol car on Grace and Noah's house tonight. The Iron Wolves don't strike me as the type to let things go." Rhodes nodded, picking up Torres's abandoned weapon. "They're not. We've been tracking them since Portland. 3 dead in Salem, dozen more hospitalized. They're escalating, Landry. This is just the beginning." Inside, Grace was comforting a shaken Noah on the couch. The boy's paper, now crumpled, showed a crayon drawing of what looked like a superhero in a wheelchair. Landry felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he'd thought long buried in the rubble of his past life. "I'm sorry, Mr. Winters," Grace began, but Landry held up a hand to stop her. "Don't be. Noah did the right thing coming to a friend when he was excited. The Iron Wolves are the ones who need to be sorry." He wheeled closer to Noah, whose eyes were still wide with a mix of fear and awe. "How about you tell me about that drawing, buddy?" As Noah began to explain his artwork, his earlier fear giving way to childlike enthusiasm, Landry's tactical mind was already running scenarios. The Iron Wolves had revealed their hand, sloppy, aggressive, used to preying on the weak. But they'd also revealed something else. The younger biker's nervous behavior, the way he'd backed down. There were cracks in their organization, weaknesses that could be exploited. Through the window, he watched Rhodes drive away, already calling for the promised patrol car. The detective was right. This was just the beginning. The Iron Wolves had brought their war to Cedar Grove, thinking they'd found another easy target. They were about to learn that some targets bite back. Night settled over Cedar Grove like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a cold autumn rain that drummed steadily against Landry's windows. In his surveillance room, he studied the monitors with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze satellite feeds in remote command centers. The Iron Wolves had retreated to their newly established clubhouse, an abandoned lumber mill on the edge of town. but their scouts had been circling the neighborhood all afternoon, testing police patrol patterns. A knock at his back door pulled his attention from the screens. Through the security feed, he recognized Detective Rhodes' familiar silhouette. The officer wasn't alone. "It's open," Landry called out, engaging the magnetic locks on the surveillance room before wheeling himself into the kitchen. Rhodes entered, accompanied by a tall woman in a crisp FBI windbreaker. "Landry?" Rhodes nodded, water dripping from his coat. "This is Special Agent Sarah Keller. She's been tracking the Iron Wolves across state lines." Agent Keller's sharp eyes took in every detail of the room, lingering briefly on the subtle security measures most would miss. "Mr. Winters? Or should I say, Master Sergeant Winters? Ghost Wolf still your preferred call sign?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Landry's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened imperceptibly on his wheelchair's arms. "That name died in Kazakhstan, along with my team. I'm just Landry now." "Nothing just about you, Sergeant." Keller pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. 3 tours with Delta, 4 with Special Forces. The mission that put you in that chair is still classified above my clearance level. But I know enough. We need your help. "I'm retired." Landry's voice was flat. "Find someone else." Rhodes stepped forward. "There is no one else, Landry. The Iron Wolves aren't just another biker gang. They're something worse." He took the tablet from Keller, showing Landry a series of photos. They're recruiting ex-military Special Forces washouts, dishonorably discharged operators, building something bigger than typical gang violence. Landry studied the images. Behind the standard biker gang facade, he could see it now. The way they moved, their formations, their tactics. These weren't just thugs playing soldier. Some of them were soldiers playing thug. "The guy you knocked down today, Snake Torres?" Keller continued. "Former Force Recon. Axel Kane, kicked out of Ranger School for psychological issues. They're turning Cedar Grove into a base of operations, using small-town police limitations to their advantage." A distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the rain. On one of his security tablets, Landry watched 3 bikes roll past Grace Chen's cafe. Just patrolling for now, but the message was clear. "I didn't leave that life behind just to start another war," Landry said quietly, wheeling to his window. In the reflection, he could see the scars on his neck, reminders of the day everything went wrong. The day he'd lost not just the use of his legs, but his faith in the system he'd served. "Sometimes the war finds you whether you want it or not," Rhodes replied. "They're not going to let this afternoon go. You humiliated them, showed their weaknesses. Guys like Kane, they can't let that stand." Landry's mind flashed to Noah's drawing, still sitting on his coffee table. A wheelchair-bound superhero. The innocence of it, the pure belief that someone could protect them, stirred something he'd thought long buried. "There's more," Keller added, her voice grim. "We've traced their weapon suppliers. They're getting military-grade hardware, the kind of stuff that doesn't just fall off trucks." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Someone's backing them. Someone with connections. The rain intensified, hammering against the windows like distant gunfire. In his mind, Landry was back in Kazakhstan, watching his team fall one by one, betrayed by the very system they'd sworn to serve. He'd never learned who sold them out, who leaked their position, but he'd never stopped looking. The Iron Wolves expansion pattern. Keller spread a map on his table. It's too organized, too strategic. They're not just taking territory. They're establishing a network. And Cedar Grove? It's perfect. Small enough to control, close to major highways, minimal federal presence. Landry wheeled closer to the map, his tactical mind already analyzing patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. "You're not telling me everything," he stated. Not a question. Keller and Rhodes exchanged looks. Finally, Rhodes spoke. 3 days ago, a former Special Forces operator was found dead in Portland, Marcus Hayes. He'd been investigating the Iron Wolves independently. This was in his possession. He handed Landry a thumb drive. Landry plugged it into his secure laptop. As he read through Hayes's files, his jaw tightened. The Iron Wolves weren't just a gang expanding its territory. They were a front, a carefully constructed facade hiding something much darker. And some of the names in Hayes' notes. Names he remembered from Kazakhstan. Hayes was onto something bigger, Keller said softly. Something that got him killed. We need someone who can pick up where he left off. Someone who knows how to operate in the shadows. Someone they've already underestimated. Another motorcycle passed outside, its engine growling like a threat. In Grace's cafe across the street, Noah was helping his mother close up, unaware of the predators circling their town. The boy looked up, waving at Landry's window with innocent trust. Landry wheeled to his locked room, entering the code. The door swung open, revealing not just surveillance equipment, but a carefully maintained arsenal. Weapons, tactical gear, communications equipment, tools of a trade he'd tried to leave behind. I won't work officially, he said finally. No agencies, no paperwork, no oversight. I do this my way. Unofficially is all we're asking for, Keller replied. Hayes' death is already being written off as a robbery gone wrong. The official investigation will go nowhere. Just tell us what you need, Rhodes added. Landry's hands moved to the hidden compartments in his wheelchair, checking equipment that hadn't been used in years but was still maintained with military precision. Information. Everything you have on their operations, their personnel, their contacts, and something else. I need you to spread the word that I'm scared, that the confrontation today spooked me. You want them to think you're vulnerable, Rhodes understood. Draw them in. They've spent years being the predators. Landry's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who had hunted worse enemies in darker places. Time they learned what it feels like to be the prey. As if to punctuate his words, thunder rolled across Cedar Grove, and in its echo Landry could hear the drums of a war he never wanted but couldn't ignore. The Iron Wolves had brought their shadow games to his town, threatening his peace, endangering people under his protection. They were about to learn why some ghosts are better left undisturbed. The next morning brought more than just dawn to Cedar Grove. As Landry wheeled through the local hardware store, carefully selecting innocuous items that would serve darker purposes, he could feel the tension in the air. The Iron Wolves had been busy overnight, marking their territory with fresh graffiti and broken windows. But it was what they hadn't done that worried him. Frank Cooper, the local mechanic and one of the few people Landry trusted, met him in the store's back aisle, pretending to browse power tools. They hit Miguel's garage last night, Frank muttered, keeping his voice low. Broke both his arms when he refused to pay protection money. Police found him this morning. Landry's hands tightened on a coil of high-tension wire. Miguel was 72, a grandfather who fixed cars for half price when people couldn't afford repairs. Anyone see who did it? Everyone saw. That's the point. Frank glanced nervously over his shoulder. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Kane and his people were at the diner this morning laughing about it, saying Miguel was an example. Through the store's front window, Landry watched two motorcycles cruise past, their riders wearing the Iron Wolves colors boldly. They were getting confident, comfortable. Good. Overconfidence made people sloppy. I need a favor, Frank, Landry said, handing him a list. These parts, modified like we discussed. Can you do it without raising flags? Frank scanned the list, his eyes widening slightly. Jesus, Landry. This isn't defense. This is... Better you don't know. Landry cut him off. Just tell me if you can do it. Yeah, give me 2 days. Frank pocketed the list. But whatever you're planning, be careful. These guys, they're different. The way they operate, it's like they've got military training or something. I know. Landry's mind went back to Hayes' files, to the connections he'd spent all night analyzing. The Iron Wolves weren't just ex-military thugs. They were pieces in a larger game. The question was, who was moving the pieces? At the checkout, his phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rhodes. Got info you need. Coffee? Usual spot. 15 minutes later, Landry positioned his wheelchair at a corner table in Grace's cafe, his back to the wall, sightlines clear to all entrances. Old habits. Grace brought his coffee without asking, her eyes conveying silent gratitude for yesterday's protection of Noah. Rhodes slid into the seat opposite, looking like he hadn't slept. "Kane's crew is planning something big," he said without preamble. "We intercepted some burner phone communications. They're calling in members from other chapters, heavy hitters." "How many?" "Dozens, maybe more. Agent Keller's sources say they're gathering weapons too. Military-grade stuff, the kind of hardware you'd use to take a small town." Landry absorbed this, his tactical mind already calculating scenarios. They're not just trying to control Cedar Grove, they're turning it into a fortress. But why here? Rhodes spread his hands in frustration. Why risk attracting attention with... The roar of engines cut him off. Through the cafe's windows, they watched 5 motorcycles pull up outside. Axel Kane dismounted first, his brass knuckles glinting in the morning sun. Snake Torres and 3 others followed, all carrying visible weapons. Grace quickly ushered other customers toward the back exit, but Kane was already through the door. He spotted Landry and smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "Well, look who it is, the wheelchair warrior himself." Kane pulled up a chair, sitting backwards on it. His men spread out, blocking exits. "We've been talking about you, old man, about yesterday, about respect." "Careful, Kane." Rhodes started to stand, but one of the bikers placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, forcing him back down. "Detective Rhodes," Kane's smile widened. "This is just a friendly conversation between veterans, nothing for the police to worry about, right?" Landry maintained eye contact with Kane, his expression neutral. "Say your piece and leave. People are trying to eat." "Oh, I'll leave. But first a message." Kane leaned forward. "We know about you, Ghost Wolf. Did some digging after yesterday. Special Forces hotshot, all decorated and special until something went wrong in Kazakhstan. Never could find the details, but..." He tapped his own legs meaningfully. "Guess it didn't end well." Landry's face revealed nothing, but internally alarms were ringing. That mission was classified. The fact that Kane knew about it confirmed his suspicions. Someone with high-level access was backing the Iron Wolves. "Here's the thing," Kane continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You had your time. You were somebody. Now..." He gestured at the wheelchair. "Now you're just a crippled old man who should have stayed out of our way. The Iron Wolves own Cedar Grove now. What happened to Miguel last night? That was just the beginning. Is that all?" Landry's voice was dangerously quiet. Kane stood, knocking his chair over deliberately. "For now. But remember, we're watching. That kid you protected yesterday? Noah, right? Sweet kid. Be a shame if something happened to him or his pretty mom because some washed-up soldier couldn't mind his own business." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Landry's hands remained relaxed on his wheelchair's arms, but his mind was already cataloging ways to kill everyone in the room. Old instincts, never really forgotten. "You're making a mistake, Kane," he said softly. "Walk away while you can." Kane laughed, a harsh sound. "No, old man. You made the mistake. This is your last warning. Stay out of our business, or we'll show you what real warfare looks like." As the bikers left, their engines splitting the morning quiet, Rhodes let out a breath he'd been holding. "They're getting bolder. That threat against Noah was a mistake," Landry finished. He wheeled toward the back of the cafe where Grace was comforting a shaken elderly customer. "Grace, I need you and Noah to pack some bags, just for a few days." She looked up, understanding in her eyes. "The safe house you mentioned?" Landry nodded. It was an old cabin outside town, secured and surveilled. "Rhodes will take you. It's time." "Time for what?" Rhodes asked, though he already knew the answer. "Time to remind the Iron Wolves why some people are feared even after they stop fighting." Landry's voice carried the weight of years of black ops and hidden wars. "They want to play soldier? Fine. Let's show them what real soldiers can do." As he wheeled out into the morning sun, Landry's mind was already shifting, falling back into patterns he'd thought long abandoned. The Iron Wolves had made 3 critical mistakes. They'd threatened an innocent child, they'd hurt defenseless people, and most importantly, They'd revealed their connection to Kazakhstan. Now it wasn't just about protecting Cedar Grove. It was about uncovering who was really pulling the strings, who had access to classified information about that fatal mission. Someone wanted this town badly enough to send an army of ex-military thugs to take it. They were about to learn that some wounds don't weaken a warrior. They just give him nothing left to lose. Night settled over Cedar Grove like a tactical shroud, clouds obscuring the moon and offering perfect cover for what needed to be done. In his basement workshop, Landry made final adjustments to the equipment Frank had modified. His wheelchair now concealed an arsenal of customized tools. Not just weapons, but sophisticated surveillance gear and countermeasures that would make military contractors envious. "You sure about this?" Frank asked, watching Landry test a modified shock absorber. "Once you start, there's no going back." "They crossed that line when they threatened Noah," Landry replied, his voice carrying the cold precision of a man preparing for war. "But this isn't just about protection anymore. The Iron Wolves know things they shouldn't. Classified details about Kazakhstan. Someone's feeding them information." Frank hesitated, then pulled out a worn envelope. "Speaking of information, I did some digging through old military contacts. That lumber mill they're using as a clubhouse? It's owned by a shell company called Aegis Strategic Solutions. Guess who's on their board?" Landry opened the envelope, studying the documents inside. His jaw tightened as he recognized a name: Colonel Victor Crane, his former commanding officer in Special Forces, the same man who had sent his team into Kazakhstan on that fatal mission. "It was never about Cedar Grove," Landry muttered, pieces falling into place. "This town is just a staging ground. But for what?" A soft beep from his surveillance tablet interrupted his thoughts. On the screen, 3 Iron Wolves motorcycles were approaching Miguel's garage. Through the high-definition camera feed, Landry could see them carrying gas cans and crude explosives. "They're sending another message," he said, wheeling toward the workshop's exit. "Making sure everyone knows what happens to people who don't fall in line." "You can't take them all on alone," Frank protested. Landry's smile was razor-thin. "Who said anything about taking them on? Tonight's about sending a message of my own." The streets were empty as Landry wheeled through the shadows, his chair moving silently thanks to Frank's modifications. He watched through his tactical monocular as the bikers began dousing Miguel's garage with gasoline, laughing and joking about their task. None of them noticed the small devices Landry had planted around the building earlier that day, military-grade motion sensors linked to his tactical tablet. He counted 5 targets, 3 by the garage, 2 keeping watch on motorcycles. Standard amateur perimeter, full of blind spots. Time to teach them the difference between thugs and soldiers. With precise movements, Landry activated the first countermeasure. The streetlights surrounding the garage suddenly went dark, plunging the area into absolute blackness. Before the bikers could react, high-frequency sonic pulses from hidden emitters disoriented their equilibrium. "What the hell?" One of the lookouts stumbled, dropping his gas can. The others reached for weapons, but their movements were uncoordinated, minds scrambled by frequencies tuned to induce confusion. Through his night vision monocular, Landry watched them panic. These weren't trained operators. They were bullies used to having the advantage of numbers and intimidation. Take those away, and their training fell apart. Moving silently, he approached the first lookout from behind. A precise strike with a modified shock baton, and the man dropped without a sound. The second lookout turned at the soft thud, but Landry was already moving, his wheelchair's reinforced frame catching the man's legs and sending him sprawling. "Someone's out there!" one of the remaining bikers shouted, firing blindly into the darkness. The muzzle flash ruined what little night vision they had left. Landry's voice, digitally modified and seemingly coming from multiple directions, cut through their confusion. "You wanted to play soldier? Lesson 1. Never give away your position." A smoke grenade rolled between them, releasing a specialized compound that burned their eyes and throats. As they staggered and coughed, Landry moved efficiently through the chaos. His attacks were precise, tactical, designed not just to incapacitate, but to send a message. Within minutes, it was over. 5 iron wolves lay unconscious, their weapons collected and disabled. Landry wheeled among them, placing a small object next to each one, a combat identifier chip from Kazakhstan, each marked with the date his team died. He activated his encrypted phone. Detective Rhodes? Anonymous tip. You'll find 5 Iron Wolves members unconscious at Miguel's garage, along with evidence of attempted arson. Might want to check their phones. I hear they've been taking photos of their various activities. As police sirens began to wail in the distance, Landry made one final adjustment. Using the biker's own spray paint, he left a message on the garage wall. Some hunters become the hunted. Back in his basement, Landry reviewed the night's footage. The Iron Wolves' reaction to his countermeasures confirmed his suspicions. They had some military training, but it was incomplete, unpolished. Hired muscle trying to play soldier. His secure laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Agent Keller. Aegis Strategic Solutions just received a major wire transfer. Something's happening soon. Another piece of the puzzle. Colonel Crane was mobilizing resources, using the Iron Wolves as his private army. But why Cedar Grove? What made this small Oregon town so valuable that it warranted this level of operation? Landry pulled up satellite maps of the area, studying topography and infrastructure. The town's location, the lumber mill's position, the timing. There had to be a connection he was missing. His phone buzzed, a text from Grace. Noah's asking about you. We're safe, but he's worried. Says his hero shouldn't have to fight alone. Something in Landry's chest tightened. He hadn't asked for this role, hadn't wanted to be anyone's hero. But looking at the Kazakhstan chips on his workbench, he knew he was past the point of choice. The Iron Wolves had brought war to his doorstep, threatened his people, and connected themselves to the mission that had cost him everything. Tomorrow, Kane and his crew would find their unconscious soldiers, see his message, and understand that the rules had changed. They thought they were apex predators, but they had never faced someone who had spent their life hunting in the darkest shadows of war. They would learn what real fear felt like. And somewhere in their organization, someone who knew about Kazakhstan would start to worry. Because Ghost Wolf wasn't just a call sign from the past, it was a promise of what was coming for them. The Iron Wolves' response came at dawn, swift and brutal. Landry watched through his surveillance network as dozens of motorcycles roared into Cedar Grove, their riders heavily armed and moving with military precision. This wasn't the usual gang showing force. This was an occupation force. I count 37 new arrivals. Agent Keller's voice crackled through his encrypted communication. Heavy weapons, body armor. These aren't street thugs, Landry. They're equipped like a private military company. From his command center, Landry tracked their movements across multiple screens. The new arrivals were different, their formation and tactics showing actual military training. Among them, he spotted familiar faces from Hayes' files, former special forces, ex-Marines, displaced operators looking for purpose and profit. They're setting up checkpoints, Detective Rhodes added, patched in from his surveillance position. Controlling access to main streets, documenting who comes and goes. This is a textbook territory control operation. Landry's hands moved across his keyboard, accessing deeper layers of surveillance. The Iron Wolves weren't just taking the streets, they were establishing a command structure. Through high-powered microphones, he could hear them coordinating with military precision. His secure phone lit up with a text from Frank. You need to see this. Shop. Now. 20 minutes later, Landry wheeled into Frank's garage through a concealed back entrance. The mechanic was waiting, his face grave as he handed over a tablet. Intercepted this from their communications, Frank said. They're not just here for control. They're looking for something. The tablet showed fragments of encrypted messages, but one phrase stood out. Project Echo. Landry's blood ran cold. He hadn't heard that name since Kazakhstan. It was never about the town, was it? Frank asked, watching Landry's reaction. No. Landry's voice was tight. Project Echo was a black operation. Experimental weapon development. My team was sent to Kazakhstan to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The mission went wrong, but we thought—" He paused, old memories surfacing. "We thought we'd destroyed everything." A burst of gunfire interrupted them, short, controlled bursts that spoke of military training. Through the shop's windows, they watched as Iron Wolves members systematically cleared buildings along Main Street, forcing residents inside. "They're searching," Landry realized. Cedar Grove sits on old military transport routes from World War II. Underground bunkers, forgotten facilities. His mind raced through possibilities. Colonel Crane isn't just using the Iron Wolves as muscle. He's using them to find something that was lost here. Frank's phone buzzed, a message from Grace at the safe house. They're going door to door, demanding property records, construction permits, anything showing underground structures. Landry's tactical mind shifted into high gear. The Iron Wolves had transformed overnight from a gang into an occupying force. That meant Crane was getting desperate. But why now? What had changed? A convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, parking outside the lumber mill. Through his monocular, Landry watched a familiar figure step out. Colonel Victor Crane himself, accompanied by private military contractors in unmarked tactical gear. "Rhodes," Landry activated his comm. "I need everything you have on local construction dating back to the 1940s. Focus on military transport and storage facilities." "Already on it," the detective replied. "But Landry, they're not just searching. They're sending teams to the school, the hospital, taking control of key infrastructure. This is starting to look like a military occupation," Landry finished. "Because that's exactly what it is. Crane's using the Iron Wolves as cover for a black operation. The gang violence, the intimidation, it's all theater to hide what they're really doing." Through his surveillance feeds, Landry watched as Kane and Snake Torres met with Crane, receiving new orders. The gang leaders looked almost eager, like attack dogs finally let off their leash. "Sir," Agent Keller's voice was urgent. "New development. They're bringing in ground-penetrating radar equipment, military grade. Whatever they're looking for, it's underground." Landry pulled up old maps of Cedar Grove, overlaying them with modern satellite imagery. The town had grown around the old military transport routes, buildings rising over forgotten tunnels and bunkers. Somewhere in that maze of underground infrastructure was something valuable enough for Crane to mobilize a private army. His computer pinged with an alert from one of his hidden cameras. Iron Wolves members were approaching his house, moving in tactical formation. Leading them was Snake Torres, carrying what looked like specialized detection equipment. "They're not just searching randomly," Landry realized. "They're following a pattern. The old transport network had checkpoints, secure storage facilities. They're mapping the whole system." "What do we do?" Frank asked, watching more motorcycles roar past the shop. Landry's expression hardened as he made calculations. The Iron Wolves had numbers and firepower, but they'd also made a critical mistake. By bringing in their military assets, they'd revealed their true purpose and their desperation. "They want to play urban warfare?" His voice carried the cold certainty of a man who had fought in the world's darkest corners. "Fine. Let's show them why Special Forces operators work in small teams." He wheeled to a hidden panel in Frank's shop, revealing a cache of equipment he'd hoped never to use again. Inside were weapons and gear that would make even military contractors envious. Tools for a very specific kind of warfare. "Frank, I need you to get word to our people. Anyone who can fight needs to be ready. The rest need to stay inside and document everything. Rhodes, coordinate with Keller. I want every Iron Wolves movement tracked and recorded." "What are you going to do?" Frank asked, though he already knew the answer. "They're looking for something in the underground network?" Landry checked his modified equipment. "Good, because that's where I'm going to show them what real ghost warfare looks like." As Cedar Grove descended into military occupation, Landry prepared for a different kind of battle. The Iron Wolves thought they had the advantage with their numbers and firepower, but they were fighting on his territory now, in the shadows and tunnels he'd spent years mapping. And in the dark, a ghost wolf hunts best alone. The access tunnel beneath Frank's garage hadn't been opened in decades. As Landry descended via a specialized lift system he'd installed years ago, the air grew thick with history and secrets. His modified wheelchair, now equipped with reinforced all-terrain wheels and advanced night vision systems, moved silently through the darkness. "Network's up," Frank's voice came through his encrypted earpiece. "You're showing clear on thermal mapping, but Landry, they're moving fast above ground. 3 teams with detection gear heading east on Mason Street." Landry checked his tactical display. The underground network was a maze of World War II-era tunnels, most forgotten by the town above. He'd spent years mapping them, preparing for a day he hoped would never come. Now, those preparations were about to pay off. "Talk to me, Keller," he subvocalized, his throat mic picking up the whispered words. "What's Crane's play?" "Multiple teams converging on grid points," the FBI agent replied. "They're following some kind of survey pattern. Whatever Project Echo left behind, they've got its location narrowed down to a specific radius." Through his advanced optics, Landry navigated the tunnel system with practiced ease. The walls here were different, newer concrete overlaying the original structure. Someone had been down here more recently than the 1940s. Roads, status on civilian compliance? Most people are staying inside, documenting everything like you asked. But Kane's gotten aggressive. They're detaining anyone they think might have historical knowledge of the town. Old-timers, city workers, anyone who might know about the tunnel system. Landry paused at an intersection, consulting his mapped overlay. The tunnel ahead showed signs of recent disturbance. Dust patterns disturbed, subtle marks on the walls from modern equipment. "They've been down here," he muttered. "Advanced teams, probably during the initial gang operations, using the criminal activity as cover for exploration." His thermal imaging picked up heat signatures above, Iron Wolves members with ground-penetrating radar sweeping the streets. They were getting closer to something. The question was, what? A memory surfaced. Kazakhstan, his team moving through mountain tunnels, following coordinates to a hidden facility. Project Echo hadn't been a weapon in the conventional sense. It was something else, something that had terrified even hardened intelligence operators. His wheelchair's sensors picked up a vibration, subtle, almost subsonic. Most would mistake it for distant machinery, but Landry recognized it. The same frequency they detected in Kazakhstan before everything went wrong. "Frank, you copy that signal?" "Yeah, reading it now. Matches the frequency patterns from those classified files you showed me. But it's weird. It's not coming from one location, it's bouncing somehow." Landry smiled grimly. Now he understood Crane's frustration. The Colonel wasn't just searching for Project Echo's remnants. He was trying to triangulate a signal that was deliberately designed to be elusive. Movement ahead caught his attention. His advanced optics picked up fresh boot prints in the tunnel dust. Someone else was down here, moving with military precision. "Keller, we've got players in the tunnels. Professional, not Iron Wolves." "Confirmed," she replied. "Satellite thermal is picking up multiple heat signatures below ground. These guys know what they're doing, Landry. They're..." Static burst through the comm as a high-powered signal jammer activated somewhere nearby. Landry switched to passive sensors, his training kicking in. The interference was tactical grade. Someone was making their move. Through the darkness, he heard the whisper of suppressed weapons and the soft crunch of professional operators moving with purpose. He counted at least 4 distinct movement patterns. Tier 1 operators, based on their discipline. "Come on, Ghost Wolf," a voice echoed through the tunnels, electronically distorted but carrying military authority. "We know you're down here. The Iron Wolves might be fooled by your wheelchair act, but we know what you're capable of." Landry remained motionless, his chair systems running silent. These weren't Crane's usual operators. This was something else, a third player in the game. "Project Echo was never destroyed," the voice continued. "You just buried it. Buried it right here in Cedar Grove, didn't you? Right under everyone's noses. That's why you chose this town, why you've stayed so long, playing guardian over a secret that could reshape the modern world." The pieces clicked into place. Crane wasn't searching for Project Echo. He was searching for what Landry's team had hidden after Kazakhstan. The Colonel had always been a step behind. never knowing that one of his own operators had survived to protect the secret. A red laser sight swept past Landry's position. The operators were good, using coordinated search patterns that would trap most targets. But Landry had spent years preparing these tunnels. With practiced precision, he activated the first of his countermeasures. Throughout the tunnel system, hidden speakers began emitting specific frequencies, the same ones that had driven men mad in Kazakhstan. Combined with the natural echo of the underground structure, it created a disorienting effect that only someone who knew its patterns could navigate. "What the?" One of the operators stumbled, his professional demeanor cracking as the frequencies affected his inner ear. Landry moved, his wheelchair virtually silent as he engaged in a form of warfare few had ever witnessed. In the confined space of the tunnels, against disoriented opponents, his disability became an advantage. His chair's lower profile and specialized modifications made him a ghost in the darkness. The first operator never saw what hit him, a precision strike from a modified shock weapon, calibrated to penetrate body armor. The second managed to fire a burst from his suppressed rifle, but the echoing frequencies threw his aim wide. "He's using the tunnels themselves as a weapon," one of them shouted. "Fall back. Regroup at..." The rest was lost as Landry triggered his next countermeasure. The tunnel's ancient ventilation system, modified over years of preparation, began pumping in a specialized gas. Non-lethal, but highly effective at disrupting trained operators' concentration and coordination. Within minutes, it was over. 4 elite operators lay unconscious, their military-grade equipment scattered around them. Landry moved among them, checking their gear. No identifiers, no patches, professional ghosts like he had once been. "I know you can still hear me," he spoke into the darkness, knowing their commander would be monitoring. "Tell your employers that Project Echo stays buried. The next team that comes down here won't get the non-lethal treatment." Above ground, Cedar Grove remained under Iron Wolf's occupation, the gang members unaware they were merely pawns in a much larger game. But beneath the streets, in the darkness where Ghost Wolf ruled, a different kind of war was just beginning. Landry activated his backup comm system. "Frank, you copy? We've got complications. Project Echo isn't just a weapon, it's still active. And now everyone knows where to find it." The real question was, how long could one man protect a secret that powerful forces would kill to possess? Cedar Grove erupted into chaos at midnight. The Iron Wolves, frustrated by their failed underground search, had switched tactics. Dozens of heavily armed members now moved through the streets with military vehicles. Not motorcycles, but armored SUVs and tactical trucks. The message was clear. The pretense of being just another biker gang was over. They're systematically searching every building with a basement or foundation older than 1950, Detective Rhodes reported through the encrypted channel. Using shaped charges on walls, ground-penetrating sonar. They're getting desperate. From his position in an abandoned clock tower that overlooked the town square, Landry watched through his tactical scope. Colonel Crane had set up his command center in the old lumber mill, surrounded by private military contractors. But something had changed. The colonel's body language showed tension, fear even. "He's not in control anymore," Landry muttered into his comm. "Someone else is pulling the strings." "About that," Agent Keller's voice crackled through. "Those operators you encountered underground ran facial recognition on their gear. High-end stuff, custom-made by a corporation called Quantum Dynamics." Landry's blood ran cold. He knew that name. They'd been involved in Project Echo from the beginning. The real architects behind the technology his team had been sent to destroy. "Sir," Frank's voice cut in urgently. "You need to see this. They're at the school." Through his scope, Landry watched as Iron Wolves members escorted someone into the elementary school building. A thin man in a lab coat, carrying sophisticated scanning equipment. Even from this distance, Landry recognized him. Dr. Marcus Chen, one of the original Project Echo scientists. It was never just about finding the tech, Landry realized. They're trying to recreate it. That's why they needed control of the town. They're setting up a new testing ground. A flash of movement caught his attention. Near the school, a small figure darted between buildings. Noah Chen, who must have slipped away from the safe house. The boy was trying to reach his mother's cafe, unaware of the danger. Rhodes, Grace's cafe, now Noah's exposed. Moving, the detective replied tersely. But the Iron Wolves had spotted the boy too. Snake Torres pointed, barking orders to his men. They moved to intercept, their movements showing their new military training. Landry was already moving, his specialized wheelchair taking the old service elevator down from the clock tower. He had minutes, maybe less, before they reached Noah. "Keller, I need a distraction. Something big." "On it," the FBI agent replied. Moments later, explosions rocked the lumber mill. Carefully placed charges Landry had set days ago now detonated remotely. The diversion worked. Half the Iron Wolves units turned toward the mill, responding to their commander's emergency. But Snake Torres and his team stayed focused on Noah, who was now trapped between buildings. Landry emerged from the shadows, his wheelchair's modified motors silent as he approached. The first Iron Wolves member never saw him coming. A precise strike with a shock baton dropped him without a sound. "There he is," Torres shouted, bringing up his military-grade rifle. "Take him down!" But Landry was already moving, his wheelchair's armored frame deflecting the first burst of fire. He triggered one of his prepared countermeasures. Hidden speakers throughout the street unleashed the same disorienting frequencies he'd used in the tunnels. The Iron Wolves members staggered, their military training useless against the sonic assault. Landry moved through them like a ghost, his strikes precise and devastating. Their body armor was useless against his specially designed weapons, tools created specifically for this kind of close-quarter combat. "Noah, run!" he shouted, engaging Torres directly. The former Force Recon operator managed to block Landry's first strike, but wasn't prepared for the wheelchair itself to be a weapon. The reinforced frame caught him in the knees, sending him sprawling. Detective Rhodes appeared at the end of the street, rushing Noah to safety. But more Iron Wolves were coming, and behind them, Landry saw Colonel Crane himself approaching with a team of quantum dynamics operators. "This ends now, Ghost Wolf," Crane called out, his voice carrying command authority. "You've hidden Project Echo long enough. Do you have any idea what that technology could do for our country?" "I know exactly what it can do," Landry replied, his voice cold. "I watched it drive an entire village insane in Kazakhstan. Watched good men turn on each other, tear themselves apart. That's why we buried it." "Buried it?" Crane laughed harshly. "You weaponized it. Turned these tunnels into one giant resonance chamber. All these years playing the wounded veteran, you've been its guardian." More Iron Wolves were surrounding them, but they kept their distance. They'd seen what happened to their comrades, seen how lethal the man in the wheelchair could be. "Last chance, Sergeant," Crane offered. "Help us recover the tech. Your country needs it." "My country?" Landry's voice was razor-sharp. "Or quantum dynamics? How much are they paying you, Colonel? How many pieces of silver to unleash something that should stay buried?" Crane's face hardened. "Take him. Alive if possible, but take him." The Iron Wolves moved in, but Landry was ready. His wheelchair spun in a precise arc, releasing a cloud of specialized gas. As the attackers stumbled, he activated his chair's most lethal modifications. Hidden compartments opened, revealing an array of weapons that would make Special Forces operators envious. "You forgot something, Colonel?" Landry said, his hands moving to the controls. Ghost Wolf wasn't just a call sign. It was a reminder that some predators do their best hunting when everyone thinks they're crippled. The street erupted into chaos as Landry unleashed years of preparation and tactical expertise. His wheelchair became a mobile weapons platform, each movement calculated for maximum effect. The Iron Wolves' military training meant nothing against an opponent who had turned his disability into his greatest weapon. But even as he fought, Landry knew this was just the beginning. Quantum dynamics wouldn't stop until they had Project Echo. The technology hidden beneath Cedar Grove was too valuable, too dangerous to fall into their hands. The real war was just beginning, and the fate of not just Cedar Grove but countless other potential testing grounds hung in the balance. Through his tactical display, Landry watched as more vehicles approached the town, unmarked trucks carrying what could only be more quantum dynamics personnel. The corporation was done playing games with local gangs. They were bringing in their real operators. "Frank," he sub-vocalized into his comm, Initiate Protocol Ghost. It's time to show them what Project Echo can really do. Above the chaos of battle, thunder rolled across Cedar Grove. But the storm coming wasn't natural. It was the sound of a weapon that should never have existed, about to be unleashed by the one man who truly understood its horror. The frequencies began as a whisper, a subtle vibration that made windows hum and dogs howl. As Landry activated the full power of Project Echo, the very ground beneath Cedar Grove became a weapon. The town's underground network, carefully modified over years, transformed into a massive resonance chamber. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed, staring at his instruments. "You didn't just hide it. You integrated it into the entire infrastructure." Quantum dynamics operators, hardened veterans of Black Ops, began to stagger as the frequencies took hold. The Iron Wolves, lacking even basic protection against sonic warfare, fell into confusion. Some dropped their weapons, clutching their heads. Others turned on each other, their minds distorted by frequencies designed to induce paranoia and fear. "Shut it down!" Colonel Crane shouted, blood trickling from his nose. "Whatever he's doing, shut it down!" But Landry had spent years preparing for this moment. Each tunnel, each forgotten bunker beneath Cedar Grove, had been transformed into part of a massive sonic weapon. The frequencies weren't random. They were precisely calibrated to affect hostile forces while protecting civilians in their homes. "Frank," Landry commanded through his protected comm system, "initiate second phase." Throughout the town, hidden speakers activated in precise sequence. The sonic assault became visible, waves of distortion rippling through the air, making it impossible for quantum dynamics forces to coordinate or communicate. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Landry's voice echoed through their tactical frequencies. Project Echo wasn't just about sonic weapons, it was about controlling the human mind through sound. That's why we shut it down in Kazakhstan. That's why it had to stay buried. Through his tactical display, he watched as the quantum dynamics operators began to break. Their military discipline crumbled against frequencies designed to trigger primal fears. Even their advanced combat training couldn't protect them from a weapon that attacked the mind itself. Snake Torres and his remaining Iron Wolves tried to push through the sonic barrier, their movements becoming increasingly erratic. What is this?" Torres stumbled, his military bearing dissolving into panic. "This is what you wanted," Landry replied, his wheelchair moving through the chaos like a ghost. "The weapon you were so desperate to control. How does it feel being on the receiving end?" But something was wrong. Colonel Crane was smiling despite the blood running from his ears. You think we came unprepared?" He pulled out a device, sleek, modern, nothing like the old Project Echo tech. "We've had years to develop countermeasures, Ghost Wolf. And now, thanks to you, we know exactly how the original system works." The device pulsed, emitting its own frequency. The air seemed to thicken as two sonic technologies clashed. Landry's modified Project Echo against quantum dynamics' modern iteration. "Agent Keller," Landry subvocalized. "Status on civilian evacuation?" "Most residents are in the bunkers you prepared," she replied. "But we've got problems. Quantum dynamics just deployed something new. Our instruments are going crazy." Through the haze of competing frequencies, Landry saw Dr. Chen working frantically on his equipment. The scientist's eyes were wide with recognition and fear. "They've weaponized it," Chen called out. "The resonance patterns. They're not trying to control it. They're trying to amplify it. If those frequencies combine..." The air itself seemed to crack as Crane's device reached full power. Windows shattered throughout Cedar Grove. The sonic waves became visible distortions, like heat waves but darker, more malevolent. "You see?" Crane shouted over the otherworldly howl of competing frequencies. "This is the future of warfare, not just controlling minds but breaking them, reshaping reality itself through sound." Landry's wheelchair sensors were screaming warnings. The frequencies were building to impossible levels. If they continued, the damage wouldn't just be psychological. It would tear Cedar Grove apart at its foundations. "Detective Rhodes," he commanded, "get everyone into the deep bunkers." Now. Already moving, Rhodes replied. But Landry. Noah's missing again. Grace is frantic. A cold certainty settled over Landry. He knew where the boy would go. The same place any scared child would seek refuge. The school. The one place that had always meant safety. Through his tactical display, he spotted the small figure running between buildings, hands pressed against his ears. Noah was heading straight for the epicenter of the sonic chaos. "He's going to die out there," Chen whispered, his instruments showing the deadly pattern of converging frequencies. "The resonance. It'll tear him apart." Landry made his decision. With precise movements, he began shutting down sections of Project Echo, systematically dampening the frequencies that protected Cedar Grove. Each deactivation sent spikes of agony through his head as Quantum Dynamics' weapon gained dominance. "What are you doing?" Frank demanded through the comm. "The whole system's failing." "Saving a life," Landry replied, already moving his wheelchair through the sonic storm. Sometimes being a soldier means knowing which battles to lose. As Project Echo's defenses fell, Quantum Dynamics' weapon reached full strength. Crane's laughter carried over the hellish frequencies, triumph in his voice. But he didn't understand. Sometimes surrender was just another form of strategy. Through the chaos of competing sonic weapons, through the madness of soldiers driven to the edge of sanity by frequencies they couldn't comprehend, Landry raced toward the school, toward Noah, toward what might be his last mission. Behind him, Cedar Grove trembled on the edge of destruction, caught between two versions of a weapon that should never have existed. And somewhere in the darkness, in the tunnels below, something was stirring, something that even Project Echo's creators had never fully understood. The real horror was just beginning. The school building loomed before Landry like a fortress under siege, its windows vibrating with competing sonic frequencies. Through the electromagnetic chaos, his tactical display picked up two heat signatures inside. Noah, huddled in his classroom, and something else, something larger and more ominous. "He's not alone in there," Agent Keller's voice crackled through the failing comm system. "We're picking up multiple quantum dynamics operators converging on your position. They're moving wrong, Landry. The frequencies are affecting them." Through his scope, Landry could see them. Elite soldiers reduced to shambling figures, their movements jerky and unnatural as the sonic weapons wreaked havoc on their nervous systems. Some had torn off their tactical gear, their minds broken by frequencies that defied human tolerance. "Frank," Landry commanded, "initiate protocol silence. Full shutdown of all ecosystems. But that'll leave us defenseless. Do it. Now." One by one, the hidden speakers throughout Cedar Grove went silent. The background hum of Project Echo, a constant presence for years, faded to nothing. In the sudden quiet, only Quantum Dynamics' weapon remained, its otherworldly pulse growing stronger. Landry wheeled toward the school entrance, his chair's modified systems compensating for the increasingly unstable ground. The pavement itself was cracking, sonic waves distorting the physical world in ways that shouldn't be possible. "Such a waste," Colonel Crane's voice echoed from somewhere nearby. "You could have been part of this, Ghost Wolf, helping us perfect the next generation of warfare." "Is that what you think this is?" Landry called back, his voice steady despite the pain pounding through his skull. "Warfare? This is madness. You've taken something that was already too dangerous and made it worse." Inside the school, he found Noah exactly where he expected, curled up under his desk, hands pressed against his ears. The boy looked up as Landry approached, tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Winters," Noah whimpered. "The noise. It hurts." "I know, buddy." Landry reached for him, but movement at the doorway made him pause. Snake Torres stood there. But something was wrong. The former Force Recon operator's eyes were wild, blood trickling from his ears. "The frequencies," Torres mumbled, his weapon shaking in his hands. They're talking to us now. Can't you hear them? The voices in the sound." Landry recognized the symptoms, the same ones he'd seen in Kazakhstan. Project Echo didn't just affect the body. It reached into the mind, drawing out primal fears and twisted desires. And Quantum Dynamics' version was worse. amplifying the horror to unprecedented levels. "Noah," Landry spoke calmly, never taking his eyes off Torres. "Remember how we practiced? Close your eyes and breathe like I showed you." The boy nodded, following the meditation techniques Landry had taught him, the same ones special forces use to maintain control under extreme stress. But Torres was beyond such techniques now, his military training shattered by frequencies that human minds weren't meant to endure. "We should have died in Kazakhstan," Torres rambled, taking an unsteady step forward. "All of us. The voices. They remember us. Remember you, Ghost Wolf." Realization hit Landry like a physical blow. "You were there. That's how Kane knew about the mission. You were part of the cleanup crew." Torres's laugh was hollow, haunted. "Cleanup? We were the test subjects. After your team contained the situation, they kept us there, studying the effects, learning how to improve it." Through the windows, Landry could see more affected soldiers approaching. Quantum dynamics operators and iron wolves alike, all moving with the same unnatural gait. The frequencies had broken through their mental conditioning, reducing them to puppets of their own twisted fears. "The colonel promised us revenge," Torres continued, his words slurring. "Said we'd make you pay for leaving us there. But this," he gestured at the air itself, which seemed to ripple with dark possibilities. "This is something else, something hungry." Landry's tactical display was going haywire, showing impossible readings. The frequencies weren't just affecting minds anymore. They were changing the physical structure of reality around them. Quantum dynamics hadn't just weaponized Project Echo. They'd turned it into something that defied the laws of nature. "Noah," Landry spoke softly, "when I say run, you run straight to Detective Rhodes. Don't stop, don't look back, understand?" The boy nodded, his small frame trembling, but his eyes showing trust in the man who had become his protector. Torres noticed the exchange, his broken mind struggling with the last remnants of humanity. "Can't let you leave," he mumbled, raising his weapon. "The frequencies, they need witnesses, need to show everyone what they did to us." Landry moved faster than anyone would expect from a man in a wheelchair. His modified shock baton caught Torres in the chest, disrupting his nervous system. But the former operator didn't fall. The frequencies had pushed him beyond normal human limitations. "Run!" Landry shouted, spinning his chair to block Torres's return strike. Noah bolted for the door as chaos erupted in the classroom. Torres fought like a man possessed, shrugging off hits that should have been incapacitating. Behind him, more affected soldiers poured in, their movements jerky and wrong like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. But Landry hadn't spent years preparing for nothing. His wheelchair became a weapon platform, each modification deployed with surgical precision. The reinforced frame blocked attacks while hidden compartments released specialized countermeasures. Through his tactical display, he tracked Noah's heat signature as the boy ran. Rhodes was there, scooping him to safety. One mission accomplished. Now for the harder part. "You want to know what really happened in Kazakhstan?" Landry called out to Torres. "Why we buried Project Echo? Look around you. This is why. It doesn't just break bodies, it breaks reality itself." The air rippled with impossible colors as quantum dynamics device reached critical levels. The school's structure groaned, materials warping under frequencies that defied physics. And through it all, Colonel Crane's laughter echoed like something from a nightmare. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The colonel appeared in the doorway, holding the device that was tearing Cedar Grove apart. The next evolution of warfare. Not just controlling minds, but reshaping the very fabric of existence. But Landry saw what Crane couldn't, the way reality itself was beginning to unravel around them. The frequencies weren't just a weapon anymore. They were becoming something else, something that even their creators couldn't control. And in the depths of Cedar Grove's tunnels, the original Project Echo stirred, awakening to answer its twisted offspring's call. The school's foundations cracked like breaking bones as reality itself buckled under the strain of competing sonic weapons. Through his tactical display, Landry watched as impossible readings spiraled beyond any measurable scale. The air itself seemed alive with dark purpose, writhing with frequencies that human senses were never meant to perceive. Do you feel it? Colonel Crane's voice carried an edge of madness as he advanced into the classroom, the device in his hands pulsing with otherworldly energy. The barrier between possible and impossible. Breaking down. This is what Project Echo was always meant to be. Around them, the affected soldiers, both quantum dynamics operators and Iron Wolves members, moved like puppets in some cosmic horror show, their bodies twisted in ways that defied anatomy, minds shattered by frequencies that reached beyond the physical world. "You've lost control," Landry stated, his wheelchair's sensors detecting structural failures spreading throughout Cedar Grove. "The frequencies aren't just affecting minds anymore. They're changing the nature of reality itself." Snake Torres stumbled forward, blood now flowing freely from his eyes as well as his ears. "The voices. They're getting louder. They remember us, Colonel. Remember what we did to them in Kazakhstan." Landry's mind flashed back to that cursed mission. The village they'd found, its inhabitants driven mad by the original Project Echo tests. The way reality had begun to warp and twist, forcing his team to make an impossible choice. "We didn't bury Project Echo to hide it," he revealed, watching Crane's face. "We buried it to contain it. The frequencies had evolved beyond human control. They'd become something else." Through the shattered windows, they could see Cedar Grove transforming. Buildings bent in physically impossible ways. Streets rippled like liquid. And from deep underground came a vibration that wasn't sound at all. It was reality itself screaming. "Sir," Agent Keller's voice crackled through Landry's failing comm. "The readings. They're matching what you described from Kazakhstan. But stronger. Whatever's happening down there." The transmission cut off as a wave of pure sonic force pulsed through the town. Crane's device sparked and whined, trying to compete with something far older and more terrible than quantum dynamics' modern iteration. "No," Crane's confidence finally cracked as his instrument readings spiraled into chaos. "No, we perfected it. We controlled it." "You idiot." Landry's voice was cold with certainty. "You didn't perfect anything. You just woke it up. The real Project Echo. The thing it became when we lost control." The ground beneath them trembled as something began to rise from Cedar Grove's tunnel network. Not sound, not energy, but pure wrongness. Frequencies that existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension. "Frank," Landry commanded into his backup comm, "execute Protocol Omega. Full activation of all original Echo hardware." "But you said never to do it. If we're going to stop this, we need to fight fire with fire." Throughout Cedar Grove, hidden speakers and resonance chambers that had laid dormant for years suddenly hummed to life. Not just the modified versions Landry had used for defense, but the original Project Echo technology, preserved and contained all these years. Torres screamed as the competing frequencies tore through what remained of his sanity. Other affected soldiers began to collapse, their minds unable to process the clash of sonic weapons that defied reality itself. "You want to know what really happened in Kazakhstan?" Landry's voice cut through the chaos as he faced Crane. "Why we buried the original tech? Because it wasn't just a weapon. It had become conscious. The frequencies evolved, developed. Intelligence. What you're using is just a pale copy. But now you've awakened the original." The colonel's face went pale as the truth finally dawned. Through the windows, they could see it, a distortion in space itself, rising from the ground like a tide of twisted physics and broken natural laws. "The tunnels," Crane whispered, his arrogance replaced by primal fear. "All these years, you weren't defending them. You were keeping something contained. And now we have minutes, maybe less, before it breaks free completely." Landry's hands moved across his wheelchair's controls, activating systems that had been prepared for this exact scenario. The original Project Echo didn't just affect minds or matter. It found a way to exist between frequencies, between realities. The classroom around them began to dissolve as competing sonic weapons tore holes in the fabric of existence itself. Through these gaps, something peered in, something that had waited years to escape its underground prison. "How?" Crane demanded, his device sparking uselessly in his hands. "How do we stop it?" "We don't," Landry replied grimly. "But I can redirect it. The original containment protocols. I modified them, improved them. All these years, playing the disabled veteran, I was preparing for this moment." His wheelchair hummed with power as hidden systems activated. The modified frame wasn't just for protection or weapons. It was a focal point for sonic technology that even Project Echo's creators hadn't imagined. "Agent Keller," he commanded through his failing comm, "get everyone clear of the tunnels. What's about to happen? There won't be anything left." Torres laughed, a broken, terrible sound. "It remembers us, Ghost Wolf. Remembers what we did to it. And now..." His body began to twist in impossible ways as the frequencies took complete control. "Now it wants to show us what it learned in the dark." The air itself seemed to scream as reality buckled under the strain of forces that should never have been unleashed. And through it all, Landry sat calmly in his wheelchair, a warrior preparing for one final battle against an enemy that existed beyond the bounds of sanity itself. The time for conventional warfare was over. The real fight, the one he'd spent years preparing for, was about to begin. And the fate of not just Cedar Grove, but reality itself, hung in the balance. "You wanted to see Project Echo's true power?" Landry's voice carried the weight of terrible certainty as he faced the approaching wave of twisted physics and broken natural laws. "Well, Colonel, wish granted." Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as Landry faced the approaching wave of sonic distortion. His wheelchair, now transformed into something far more complex than a simple mobility aid, hummed with power as decades-old technology awakened to its master's call. "Clear the town!" His voice carried through emergency frequencies. "Everyone to the bunkers, now!" Through his tactical display, he watched as Cedar Grove's residents fled the approaching chaos. Detective Rhodes leading civilians to safety, Agent Keller coordinating emergency responses, Frank activating the final protective measures they'd spent years preparing. Colonel Crane stood transfixed, his modern device sparking uselessly as the original Project Echo rose from its underground prison. The frequencies it emanated weren't just sound. They were consciousness itself, twisted into weapons that defied comprehension. All these years, Landry's voice cut through the chaos as his wheelchair's systems reached full power. "You thought I stayed in Cedar Grove because I was hiding, but I was standing guard, keeping watch over something that should never have been freed." The affected soldiers, Iron Wolves and quantum dynamics operators alike, began to dissolve, their bodies unable to maintain coherence as reality warped around them. Snake Torres was the last to go, his final words lost in a scream that echoed across dimensions. "The containment protocols," Landry continued, his hands dancing across controls hidden in his chair's arms. "They weren't perfect. The frequencies kept evolving, learning. I had to stay, had to maintain the barriers, had to be ready for the day someone like you came looking." The wave of twisted physics reached the school, and the building's structure began to unravel. Walls bent in impossible angles, corridors stretched into infinity, and through it all, something vast and alien observed with senses beyond human understanding. "You can't stop it," Crane shouted over the reality-shredding cacophony. "Nothing can." "Stop it?" Landry's laugh was grim. "Number, but I can give it what it wants, what it's been waiting for all these years." His wheelchair's hidden systems activated in sequence, each one tuned to frequencies that scientists had never intended to exist. The chair wasn't just a weapon platform. It was a key, designed to unlock something even more terrible than what was escaping. "When we lost control in Kazakhstan," Landry revealed, "when the frequencies gained consciousness, they split, divided. What we buried here wasn't the weapon. It was half of something greater. Something that's been trying to reunite ever since." Understanding dawned in Crane's eyes as the truth finally hit him. The other site, the one in Kazakhstan, is it still active? Active? It's awake. Has been for years, calling to its other half. And now, thanks to your interference, Thanks to your arrogant attempt to control forces you don't understand, the barriers are finally breaking. The air itself seemed to tear as Project Echo's frequencies reached beyond their containment. But Landry wasn't trying to stop it anymore. His wheelchair's systems were creating a pathway, a bridge between 2 points of twisted reality. Ghost Wolf protocols, he commanded into his secure communication. Authorization Echo 7 Alpha. Connect to Kazakhstan site. Somewhere across the world, in another forgotten facility, ancient speakers hummed to life. The frequencies that had haunted Landry's dreams for decades finally answered their counterparts' call. "Clear the area," he shouted to Crane. "Unless you want to see what happens when two pieces of broken reality try to become whole again." The colonel ran, his military bearing forgotten in the face of cosmic horror. But Landry remained, his wheelchair anchored as reality buckled around him. He had one last task, ensuring that when the frequencies reunited, they followed a path away from our dimension. "Noah," he spoke softly into his comm, knowing the boy was safe in the bunker with his mother. "Remember what I taught you. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who know when to stand their ground." The frequencies reached a crescendo as two halves of an impossible whole strained to reconnect. Landry's wheelchair became the focal point, its systems directing the energy upward, away from Cedar Grove, away from Earth itself. "Frank," he commanded, "initiate final sequence. Whatever happens, it's been an honor." The sky above Cedar Grove split open as Project Echo's two halves finally reunited. The frequencies that had threatened to destroy reality instead found a path to somewhere else, somewhere beyond human comprehension. In that final moment, as his wheelchair systems channeled powers that should never have existed, Landry felt something like peace. He had completed his mission, protected his town, kept his promises. The light that engulfed him wasn't natural. It was the color of frequencies that existed between dimensions. And as Cedar Grove watched in awe as reality slowly began to heal itself, they saw their quiet protector do what he had always done: stand guardian against forces that threatened the innocent. Days later, when the town began to rebuild, they found his wheelchair empty. Some say he was destroyed in that final confrontation. Others believe he was transformed, becoming something that could follow Project Echo to its new home, ensuring it never threatened our world again. But if you visit Cedar Grove today, if you walk its quiet streets and talk to its residents, they'll tell you a different story. They'll tell you about the man who proved that true strength isn't measured by physical ability, but by the size of one's heart and the depth of one's sacrifice. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the wind blows just right, they say you can still hear the soft hum of frequencies keeping watch over the town, a ghostly guardian, forever standing sentinel against the darkness. Noah Chen still visits the spot where it happened, leaving drawings for the man who taught him that heroes come in all forms. And if you look carefully at the wheelchair monument they erected in the town square, you might notice something strange. No matter what time of day, no matter how the sun moves, it never casts a shadow. Some say it's just a trick of the light, but those who know the truth understand. Some heroes transcend the physical world, becoming legends that remind us all. True strength lies not in our abilities, but in our willingness to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. ***.